time for our next session, and welcome Robin.
Was that it? Was that the introduction?
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's good. Short and sweet. Afternoon. Now I can't see, so any kind of audience reaction, even if it's like groans and things, would be really appreciated. So I know that you haven't left the building. Yeah, just like that, that's good. Great, so after that brilliant session earlier, my presentation is going to be around the importance of accessibility. And if that hadn't come across loud and clear in Marcy's session, then I'm just going to drive it home about the importance of accessibility and how it's not just the niche requirement or consideration that it's been treated as up until now. And for those few of you who said that you were in Berlin last November, then apologies, because I'm going to start off with that little scene setting bit that I did at the beginning of my presentation last time. So, is that up on the screen already?
Yeah.
Cool. So I work for a charity in the UK called AbilityNet, and we're all things technology and disability. And we've got a 30-strong accessibility consultancy team, using a range of different tools, as well as an awful lot of manual inspection of code, a brief taste of which we had this morning. And we also do workplace adjustment assessments. So we tackle it from the code and the UI point of view, making sure that the applications and the websites and the apps that people use are accessible, but we also tackle it from the end user, assistive technology and adjustments point of view as well. So we are what we would call a cold-face organisation, so we work with disabled people every day. So our experience, I nearly said expertise, but hopefully that will, well anyway, AbilityNet's expertise as an organisation as a whole is based on real life experience with end users every day. So at AbilityNet, I'm at USA on Twitter if people want to follow me. I'll send links to my articles, the things that I'm going to cover here, and also tomorrow as well. I'll use the Ally Club hashtag for this one, and tomorrow the BTConf hashtag for that as well. So I have an annoying habit of not showing all of any of the videos that I'm going to show today and tomorrow. But yeah, just go with it. So normally I would be here with a dog, but because he doesn't fly, I thought I would just introduce you. This is Archie. So yeah, normally I would have Archie with me, but I just thought I'd show you that. So a bit of scene setting then. Back in the 80s, with the advent of the personal computer, everything changed. So now in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same elsewhere, 90% of jobs use a computer of some shape or form. And for people with disabilities, the opportunities, the choices that technology has brought to them and to their lives can't be underestimated. If it wasn't for technology, in my case, things having to talk to me, or a refreshable braille display, if you've got several $1 million to throw at one, makes all the difference for education. Makes me employable, etc., etc. So yeah, technology has made all the difference. All of these components that you see here, keyboard, mouse, screen, there are dozens of different alternatives. Bigger screen, make the text larger on the screen. If you can't see the screen at all, make it speak. You can use a standard keyboard, get a more natural keyboard, a more ergonomic one, or accordion keyboard if you've only got one hand, or voice recognition, etc., etc., etc. You guys know all of this already. But redundancy, which is obviously what the developers, that's how we would call it in kind of developer speak, redundancy is incredibly important. There should be half a dozen ways of doing something, and that's what makes technology such a leveler, so all-inclusive for people, regardless of how they want to do it. And that might be through preference, or it might be through disability or impairment. How many of you guys have used dictation in any shape or form, any time? Yeah, I mean, it's built into every smartphone these days, and whilst you might have to go back and correct a few things, if you've got a lot of text to put in there, it can be incredibly powerful. And for people with an impairment, they might need to use it every single day, and they can then dictate at 300 words a minute. With the real enterprise, like drag and dictate and stuff like that, it gets incredibly accurate with the right headset and noise environment and that sort of thing. Nobody can type at that speed. I know you guys being mostly developers, it doesn't really lend itself to that, but there are developers that are using voice recognition, autocorrect, code snippets, etc. You can use it to drive the UI as well, so it's incredibly powerful. And then 10 years ago, I know smartphones were around before 10 years ago, before the iPhone, but just, let's put this, flag in the ground. For the last decade or so, then we have smartphones. And smartphones have taken all the smarts of a computer with you wherever you go. And not only that, they've got a whole bunch of other sensors, compass, accelerometer, GPS, camera, all of these things that are built in and are with you wherever you are. And particularly for people with disabilities, I use the camera, for example, all the time, which you might think a blind person actually doesn't use the camera on his smartphone quite as often as other people. I don't take selfies, by the way. But I could actually, because built into the iPhone's camera app, it will tell you how many faces are there and where they are, and you can center them nicely, and it will even tell you when the person's smiling and that sort of thing. And we'll look at that kind of technology in a moment. But yeah, now you've got all of these with you all the time. So that was incredibly empowering, and loads of disabled people love their smartphones, probably, unbelievable as it may sound, even more than you guys, even more than the average person who uses a smartphone. And we all know, how much the average person loves their smartphone. But as soon as computing went mobile, everything changed with regards to accessibility. Accessibility used to be something that disabled people would need to do to adjust their working environment. If the text was too small, you'd make it a bit bigger. If the sun was shining on your screen and you had a vision impairment, or even if you didn't, you would go over and you would close the blinds, or you would rearrange your workstation so that it would be easier to see, it wouldn't be glaring straight on the screen, etc. If you couldn't see the keys very easily on the keyboard, you'd get high-vis keyboard or keyboard stickers to stick on it. You could arrange your workstation just so you could have your dragon or whatever it might be. But as soon as you start doing it out and about, we've now entered the age of extreme computing. You guys are computing on the edge on a daily basis. Every single mobile phone user is an extreme computer user. And as a result, accessibility was suddenly catapulted into the mainstream. Every single person is temporarily disabled on a daily basis. In the States, the disabled community have this phrase, have had for a long time, for the able-bodied. It's called TABS, temporarily able-bodied. That's what people who don't have a disability are. They're only temporarily able-bodied. And that is kind of true, isn't it? It's a bit morbid, but disability will get you all in the end if you hopefully live long enough. Hearing goes, dexterity goes, memory goes, all that sort of thing. And that's 1 in 5 people of working age across the globe will become disabled, at some point during their working lives, 16 to 68, 69, whatever the working age is these days. So this isn't, insignificant by any means, but that is a bit of a morbid phrase, really, calling them tabs. But anyway, but now with mobile computing, you guys are all disabled or impaired on a daily basis as you're out and about with your phone. So here we've got somebody who probably hasn't got an impairment at all. She's got glasses, and she's having to lift them up. Maybe they're long-distance glasses rather than reading glasses. But if you've got a small sheet of glass on a bright sunny day, and as Marcy was showing us earlier, colour contrast perhaps isn't all that it could be, you're going to struggle. And if it's an app, it's really difficult to impose your own colour scheme. There are ways that you can do it, and it's a bit of a sledgehammer. It's not a kind of a sophisticated approach. But in most smartphones, pretty much the colours that are on the app or the website are what you have to deal with. And with apps in particular, there isn't really a zoom in option. There are ways that you can increase the text size to a certain extent, but those tools are quite limited as well. So we're extreme computing. We've now gone from a massive screen that you could make even more massive if you had difficulty seeing the text, to really quite small screens and really very extreme environments. So now accessibility is for this lady, and it's for everybody else that would struggle on a bright sunny day with a small shiny sheet of glass. So here we've got someone with a mobile phone in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other. Has that been anyone today? Or yesterday?
Yep.
So, now this person is quite social. He likes chatting to people, so he's in his coffee break, and he actually did talk to the person next to him in the queue while they queued for their coffee. So that he wasn't on his phone during that time, got his coffee. Now he's got like a minute and a half left of his coffee break before he has to go back to his desk. So he's madly doing something on his phone. So he's got a couple of impairments here. He's got motor impairment, because he's doing his phone one-handed with his thumb maybe. He's maybe even walking along as well, and that makes him significantly dexterity impaired. And he's got exactly the same requirements about proximity of tappable areas, minimum area for tappable areas of 44 by 44 px. He's got a number of considerations that are going, exactly the same as for people that have got a 24/7 motor or dexterity difficulty. And because he's so time constrained, he's got 90 seconds left to quickly do what he's trying to do on an app or web page. He's very time constrained, and he's got usability requirements. He needs extreme usability to be able to do what he wants to do in that time. He doesn't want to faff on wondering about what this UI is asking him to do. And that's exactly the same. That extreme UX for what people who have a cognitive difficulty require 24/7 to be able to successfully complete that transaction without having somebody around to support them. So he's cognitively impaired, he's motor impaired. I'm sure you guys, and we perhaps could have a little chat later on about other examples that you guys, I'm sure you guys have got lots that kind of come to mind that are better than my examples that I can then use in future presentations instead of mine to really drive the point home. Something that would apply to people on a daily basis. So I wanted to find a picture of somebody that had big sausage fingers, great big kind of mutant fingers, but I couldn't find one. So just imagine that this person's got very big jumbo fingers. So I know those have got bigger and bigger, but we're not all kind of holding massive phablets to the side of our heads or anything. Not that we make phone calls, but anyway. But if you've got big fingers, anyone here got mutant fingers? Kind of. We'll check later. So you guys, are motor impaired on a permanent basis when it comes to extreme computing, mobile computing. So just another example, smaller screen than you were dealing with before, maybe some of the trackpads that you were using on laptops that aren't very generous in size were causing problems to you as well from a dexterity point of view. But yeah, some people just have big fingers. So I've got this picture here of what is in effect a blank screen. The phone is switched off, and since iOS 11 on iPhones, this is actually a reality. This is do not disturb whilst driving. So you are forced to have a blank screen while you're driving along, and only very important alerts are passed through, and they're displayed in a kind of high-vis, easy-to-see way. If you're in a car and you're the driver, then this is, in effect, the predominant UI for you if you want to interact with technology in any way, i.e. a blank screen. And this lends itself to voice in, voice out, for example, which is absolutely mushrooming at an astronomical, the hockey stick sales of the Echo, the Amazon Echo Home Assistants over the Christmas period. Something like 50 million devices were sold over the Christmas period. Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk sell literally millions of products, and of all of those, the best-selling product in both stores was the Echo Dot. So this is really they're here, aren't they, in Germany? The Echoes? Yeah, cool. So watch this space. It's going to be absolutely huge. And that some of them do have screens, but the basic kind of core set of functionality with these Home Assistants is a headless UI. It's voice in, voice out, and using natural language as the interface. You guys are going to be dealing with the conversational internet, as it's called, a headless UI approach to delivering content and interacting with users. You're definitely going to be working in that space, unless you're going to retire in the next 12 months. But I think you guys are probably a lot younger than that. Or maybe you've got a Kickstarter and you're just going to sell it for like 20 million, I don't know. So, this is in effect the way that you'll have to be thinking about interactions, not just in the car, but elsewhere as well. And for many people with a vision impairment, making sure that your content and functionality is speech friendly, as we saw earlier in Marcy's presentation, then you will crack the voice out bit, and the voice in bit is largely platform dependent, but you can definitely make sure that the things that how you code things. For example, if you've got a submit button on a search form, and the graphical image has the word go on it, but the attribute is submit, then a dragon or any voice user is going to be saying click go until they're blue in the face, and it will never submit that form. So there are some fundamental do's and don'ts when it comes to making sure that your content and functionality is voice input friendly as well. And when you've got those considerations, you've got redundancy. It will look great on screen, it will look great when you operate it with a mouse, it will look great from the keyboard, and it will be voice friendly, voice output friendly, and voice input friendly as well. So just to finish off on the boring slides, I mentioned before that disabled people are absolutely amongst your mobile customers and your desktop customers, that goes without saying. But a lot of people might think that, this is probably not a safe assumption, but I have had people come up to me before saying, how can a blind person use a smartphone, for example, or how can someone like Professor Hawking use an iPad? He absolutely can. Several versions of iOS back now have been fully switch enabled, so he can use an iPad or an iPhone with a single switch that he clicks with his cheek, and it will scan through the items, and then he can click it again to activate a particular item. He's in effect a keyboard user on a website. Okay. Cool. So we're going to look at some video clips in a moment. What I'm going to do now, though, is quickly demo. I mentioned before that as a blind person, I get a lot of use out of the camera. So I've got an app on here. I don't know if I got this. Is the screen off here?
Yeah.
So there's a screen curtain that's built into VoiceOver. So if I do that, I've just doubled my battery life. Very handy. And people can't look over my shoulder. Not that I'm particularly fussed about security. For example, for the last 40-odd years, no, I haven't had a credit card for that long. For the last 30-odd years, every time I'm in the queue for an ATM, cash machine, I have to ask the random person next to me in the queue, here's my card, here's my PIN number, this is how much I want, please. And so yeah, I don't care much about security. I can't be allowed to have that luxury in other areas of my life. But yeah, ideally, when things like this are built in, I much prefer the increased battery potential of this one actually, but I'll get rid of the... Okay, so at least you guys can see what I'm doing. So this is an app called TapTapC. It's a free app. It does object and text recognition, but the engine that it's based on, the smarts, the machine learning, isn't created for disabled people. It's absolutely mainstream. Machine learning is massive, it's massively important in being able to analyze videos, to make them indexable. It's for analysing pictures in social media sites so that you can more easily find your friends and search for objects of dogs or ice cream vans or whatever it might be on the internet. So I'm just going to, this is a very simple app, it's just got a very big button. I'll take a picture of this. I really don't know what I'm going to take a picture of, but my laptop, let's have a look. So, picture 3 in progress. I took 2 pictures while I was sitting down earlier there, and they did take quite a while to process because it's on 3G here. If this was a really fast Wi-Fi, it would take about 4 seconds probably. Picture 3 in progress. So we'll see what it says. Know any good jokes? Picture 3 is MacBook Air. That's cool. So that worked. Can I have a victim? I mean a volunteer. If somebody random could come up from the audience with holding something random, that would be really good. So talk amongst, decide amongst yourself.
Yeah, hello.
Hiya. So, not that I would do this every day, taking pictures of people, but Am I kind of roughly pointing at you?
Yeah.
Okay, are you holding something?
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. I think you're done. Well, you can tell me if it's, let's have a look. Picture 1 in progress. It's come from picture 3 to picture 1, don't know why, but anyway. So, a moment ago I took a picture of my toffee. Picture 1, hold on. Oh. Picture 1 is man holding black Canon DSLR with lens. Is that right?
You can bring that back to the audience, but that's right, yeah.
Okay, I took a picture of my cup and saucer a moment ago and it said, white porcelain, I don't know if it's porcelain, probably not, coffee cup and saucer. So this is incredibly powerful, and you can imagine if you combined this with something like the pivot head glasses. Tomorrow, if anyone's going to be at the conference, I'm going to show a video of the top 5 smart glasses that are available on Amazon now. And I'm really excited about getting one of those if I save my pennies up, because to have that sort of power at the press of a button or the issuing of a voice command would be really cool for me to be able to know what's around me and read menus or whatever it might be. So there we've got the mainstream device, the phone, the mainstream sensor, the camera, the smarts, but the smarts being machine learning, completely mainstream, not designed, not developed for disabled people, but given an application that's incredibly powerful for disabled people. And back in Berlin in November, I showed a quick video clip of another app called Be My Eyes. I don't know if anyone was there and decided to become part of that community, but if you search for Be My Eyes, it's on both iOS and Android, then you can be a remote pair of eyes for somebody who needs to have them at a given moment to know whether the dishwasher's finished, or because they're out and about and they've got a bit disoriented and they need a bit of help, or to help them with the pin on their ATM machine, for example. So things like that. It's incredibly powerful. Another area, sorry, that was really bad, wasn't it? That is incredibly exciting and that is totally mainstream is autonomous driving, self-driving vehicles. We finished CES last week and autonomous vehicles were absolutely everywhere. GM, General Motors, you don't get much bigger than that as an auto manufacturing company, have publicly announced that they are going to have a model, a fully autonomous model, out by 2019, so next year, basically. So this was me, a few months ago, getting my first taste of driving an autonomous car. Does that come up right? Yep. What do you mean that wasn't me? It was me at the beginning and it was me at the end. But yeah, there was somebody else in between. I think the car even changed colour, didn't it? Anyway, basically, it wasn't my car. I wish it was my Tesla, but no, it was somebody else's, a friend. And I got in the driver's seat, and he was about 30 yards away, and he pressed this button, which is like the summon button, and the car unparked itself and went to him. And then we basically did it in reverse, where he pressed the auto park button and it went back into, I don't even know if it was the same parking space, but it parked itself again. So, but I thought that was very exciting. So I could feel the steering wheel turn. I didn't touch the pedals. I didn't dare have my feet anywhere near the pedals, but it was driving itself. So that's my very, very small taste, but it's certainly not going to be the last time I'm in an autonomous vehicle. And the whole premise of autonomous self-driving cars is that they are just that. They're going to be self-driving. Level 5 autonomy is what it is. There's 4 stages. If you've got like auto parking, that's level 2. If you've got smart cruise control, that's level 3. If you've got smart cruise control and lane keeping, like the Teslas do, so that you can, basically get on the highway and go for 10 junctions without touching the steering wheel or the pedals, and it will change lanes and overtake as necessary, etc. And level 5 is, from door to door, everything is handled, and there are lots of manufacturers that are at level 5 at the moment. The only thing that's holding them back, well, they want to test the heck out of these things, as you can well imagine, and is legislation. That's the only other hurdle at the moment. The insurance companies, the insurance industry are all for it. They're very excited about it, because all indications are that these self-driving cars are better than humans, and there's going to be far fewer accidents. And they've already said, yes, we will pay up. And these machines crunch 750 gigs of data a minute. So the audit trail, when there is an accident, is quite significant. So we will definitely be able to tell who done it, whose fault it was. And the insurance companies have already confirmed that they're happy to pay up. So the only hurdle is, legislation, get these things legal on public roads and people's confidence in them. But that will all come. But because they have to be self-driving, you have to be able to hail them using your Uber app or whatever app it is that you're going to be using in the future. Because they have to be able to come to you from wherever they are, then they won't obviously require any human intervention or requirement from the passenger. The passenger, and this is where you guys come in, the passenger can do whatever they like in the car, and that will be consuming content, it will be surfing the web, they will be motor impaired or dexterity impaired, because these rides will be as bumpy as the roads that they're going over. You'll have to think about movement and animation, because these guys won't be looking out of the window, they'll be looking down, they might not even be facing forwards. So you'll need to be very conscious of that sort of thing. VR, which some of these auto manufacturers are saying they will be providing a standard in some of their higher end vehicles, so that people don't even have to be in the same world as they're travelling around, can cause great nausea, as you know. So there's a lot of need to improve that aspect of VR. But AR, for example, to tell you where you're going and to provide highlights of what is you're going past, etc. All of these sort of things are projects that you guys may well be involved in going forward. Certainly, if you look at some of the things coming out of CES, all of those things are voiced as options that are going to be explored in this new world of autonomous driving. This is my lady. She sounds nice. Well, she's a bit quick maybe, but anyway, it's not the robotic voice that it used to be. So I'm going to talk now very briefly about flipping it round. So this is a definitely specialist, disability-focused app. It's AAC, Augmented and Alternative Communication. It's a device for people that have very significant speech impairment, communication difficulty, and they need, like Professor Hawking, to have some, the device do the speech for them. But just like, tabs or people that are extreme computing on a daily basis have temporary impairments, this lady isn't disabled, but she's temporarily lost her voice. This is a blind date that she's going on, and she's lost her voice, but she decided to go anyway, and she's using an app called iVoice to do the talking for her. So we'll just watch a bit of this because of time constraints, but also because it gets a bit saucy later on. So, but I'll send the link round for this one. I'll just skip over the title.
I'm sorry I was late. Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. Parking was crazy. I haven't been here before, but...
That's okay. It's nice to finally meet you.
It's good to meet you. That came out of your iPhone.
Yeah, I have laryngitis, so I will be communicating through my new iVoice application. I programmed all of my responses for the night.
Okay, you mean you're writing it down somehow and it's reading it back to me?
No, all my responses are pre-programmed for tonight.
So you know everything I'm going to say tonight?
Well, I know how I'm going to respond to everything you are going to say tonight.
Okay, then, what's my favorite color?
I don't know what your favorite color is, silly.
But you knew I was going to say, what's my favorite color?
I knew I was going to respond. I don't know what your favorite color is, silly.
Well, it's blue, in case you were wondering.
Oh, my brother's favorite color is blue too.
Okay. If your favorite color was blue too, then you would know my favorite color was blue when I asked you what's my favorite color moments ago. Because I'm the two. I'm the two in that statement.
I have to go to the bathroom.
We'll just be here waiting to see what happens. And see what fate has in store for us. Because not like I can fast forward and see what your responses are for the rest of the night. It's not like I have that power or ability. Because I don't have a magic iPhone that just knows the future.
Just stop that. So we've talked about how accessibility is now no longer just for disabled people, and I hope you guys are on board with that. In fact, just the very term, I mean, I hesitate to say this, in an accessibility club, or an A11Y club, but even the term accessibility has probably got too much baggage and is almost inextricably associated in people's minds with helping disabled people to access the internet or mobile apps, etc. Inclusive design, which is something that means that you'll be creating things that are fit for purpose, that are able to be accessed by everybody, is probably a phrase that we would want people to think in terms of. And when you think that accessibility is no longer for disabled people, and you do that mental kind of 180 and say, okay, this isn't a bolt-on activity. This isn't something that we need to think about after we've thought about the important stuff, because if it's bolt-on, then when things, when push comes to shove, it can be dropped off. Whereas if it's something that you internalize, you embrace the fact that it's absolutely a mainstream requirement, it's going to affect every single user on mobile platforms on a daily basis, and to a lesser extent on desktops as well. There's so much research about how mainstream usability is improved by accessibility. The RNIB, the Royal National Institute for the Blind in the UK, did some research, and they looked at websites with both blind people and a control group of able-bodied, maybe tabs, users. And one of the most interesting findings that came out of it was one actually that they hadn't kind of had had in mind at the beginning. It was the control group, the able-bodied group of testers. Sites that met at least single A were actually easier and quicker to use by the able-bodied group as well, by a factor of 35% on average. So even if a site is single A, on average, every user will be able to perform a range of tasks 35% more quickly on average. And so they called that the usability bonus, the accessibility usability bonus, and that's 35% usability bonus. And then there's all the SEO, there's all the platform compatibility bonuses that you get when you separate content from functionality, presentation from content, etc. So there are so many reasons why we need to start thinking about accessibility in the biggest possible audience frame, and inclusive design is a way to think about that. And then we've got this blurring of specialist versus mainstream when it comes to devices. I used to have to carry a backpack of gadgets around, a talking GPS, a talking MP3 player, a talking note taker, a talking barcode scanner, a talking light detector, and each one cost an absolute fortune, and each one had its own charger. So that was a backpack of equipment. And now I've got all of those, plus 100 other things in this one mainstream device. And okay, I've got an expensive one, but it's equally true, or 95% true for an Android device of sort of €75, for example. So we've really moved on. So this blurring between what is for the accessibility market or the disabled market and what is for everybody has completely turned around. And we see that here with this app, which is arguably definitely for a specialist audience, but now it's being used by somebody just because she can, she didn't want to forego her date. So I apologise in advance for people that are going to be at my presentation tomorrow. I thought I would show one video. This is the only thing that I'm going to be covering tomorrow that you guys are going to get a sneak preview of. And it's to continue this idea about the proliferation of platforms that you guys are definitely going to be involved in designing for, and thinking, scratching your head and saying, what's inclusive design looking like on this platform or on this project? really kind of thinking outside the box and saying, okay, what's redundant? You know, how can I build redundancy into this particular scenario? And I talked earlier about monitors and how they can be made bigger if you need to, if you've got a vision impairment, or you've just got, you want a 5K monitor so you can have Xcode over here and, the other developer tools over there and your project down there, whatever it might be. Imagine though, if you could have a monitor that filled the whole of your field of vision, and that's exactly what we're going to have. Sony are working on something which they project will come out by 2021. So let's watch a quick summary of their computer in a contact lens.
The future. The internet is going to be in our contact lens. When the internet is in our contact lens, you blink and you will go online.
Sony filed a patent in the US for a smart contact lens. The device would not only take photos and video, but also store data with no need for a tether to a smartphone. The lens would feature an organic electroluminescence display screen. By blinking an eye, the user would be able to operate the lens via the display. The camera would feature autofocus, automatic exposure adjustment, and adjustable zoom. The device would also be able to record video, store it, and play it back. The image capture technology and data storage would be held within the lens. Simple piezoelectric sensors would allow the movements of the eye to change the battery of the device. The task now is to fit all of this technology comfortably into the lens.
Talk over it very rudely while it finishes off. So yeah, contact lenses computers by 2021, self-driving cars by 2019. We live in exciting times. So you might think, well, how can we miniaturize all that sort of thing? Well, the battery is the main bulk of electronics these days, and obviously if the screen is smaller, that's the thing that takes the most juice, and you can't get a smaller screen really than something that can fit in the area of your pupil. That's why a smartwatch can last all day with a much smaller battery than your smartphone requires, etc. So yeah, driving it by the sort of piezoelectric effect being able to charge it just from the movements of your eye. And you might think, well, what about transparent screens? You know, surely that's not a thing, is it? Well, how many people have got a computer monitor at home? Everyone, right? Yeah. Okay, well, you've got a transparent screen. So if it's an LCD monitor, which is, you know, 90% because they're the kind of standard, cheaper, normal computer monitors, all you've got to do is take the back off, then take the lighting panel off, because LCD don't produce their own light. You know, there's a light panel behind it shining through. But if you think about it, the bit that actually, the liquid crystal display that actually turns that white light into different colours, or if it's black, you know, blocks it out altogether, has to be transparent. Because if it's not, then, you know, how will the lighting panel behind it shine through so uniformly? So if you take the back off your monitor, take the lighting panel off, you've got a transparent display. Put it up against an illuminated back white painted wall and it'll look similar-ish, but it is a transparent display. If you've got a fancy OLED TV or something, it's even easier, just take the back off. They don't have a lighting panel because they produce their own, you know, organic light emitting diodes, so they do the old light emitting themselves. So we will have monitors that are built into windows, into windows of cars, you know, self-driving cars, to give you information about what you're passing by, etc., into windows in the foyers of buildings, you know, giving you adverts or, you know, information about the business or shop or whatever it might be. So absolutely all this stuff is out there, and accessibility, WCAG as we know it today, by the way, and various other more kind of localized versions of it, will all have to keep abreast, not only of mobile, not only of the conversational internet, you know, headless UIs, but so many different platforms, so many different extreme environments that people are going to be accessing content in. So before we kind of broaden it out to a discussion, well, kind of the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about in a moment, we'll just finish off with something that is the perfect example for the need for redundancy. So this is a chap, Felix Baumgartner. I don't know if you guys are aware, it was a few years ago now, but he wanted to get 2 world records. He went up in a balloon, sponsored by Red Bull, to the edge of space and jumped off. He wanted to have the highest freefall record and the longest freefall record before pulling his parachute, and I'll tell you afterwards why on earth I'm showing this to you. I'll just see if it's over there. Ooh. Have you got a picture but not sound? Yeah. Okay. It might have been that because, you know, my lady's not talking. I'm arrowing up and down and I'm not forgetting. Sorry, I'll pull it out, put it back in again.
Force mark contacted. 5 Felix Baumgartner
Let's
Superstar.
try that, let's try that.
DLCD.
There we go. So, why am I showing you that? Well, this is extreme computing in quite an extreme form, super extreme. He had this really cool HUD, heads-up display, on his visor, and it had all of this instrumentation. It had an altimeter, that's really important, an accelerometer, all this stuff that could give him the information that he needed. And when he jumped off, he got the first world record, which was the highest free fall, 40 kilometres, just under 25 miles up in the edge of space, as high as a balloon can go. So he jumped off and he got the first world record, but then his HUD, well, his visor, messed it up horrendously, and he couldn't see any of his instrumentation. He was probably breathing quite heavily, which I would have done in his case. Don't blame him at all. And obviously on-the-ground testing did not highlight or uncover the fact that, you know, it could have messed up in this sort of extreme environment. Maybe it was because of the cold up there, you know, the atmosphere or whatever it might be. Maybe he'd never breathed so heavily in his previously when he was testing it, I don't know. But it basically messed it up, and he had no redundancy. He had no haptics, you know, giving a buzz at every 1,000 meters, or a big buzz to say, okay, you're now at the altitude where you need to pull your cord if you want to get the world record. It would have been so easy to build in redundancy, and it almost could have been a life or death situation. You know, redundancy for him could have been life or death. For disabled people, it could be life choices. It could be about employment. It could be about education. It could be about quality of life and being able to socialise online or whatever it might be. But equally as important, really, because it's death by 1,000 cuts, as they say. So it could have been life and death for him, and because he had no instrumentation, he was, you know, plummeting to earth, blind, then he pulled the cord a lot sooner than he was planning to, and I don't blame him at all for doing that. Better too soon than too late when it comes to pulling parachute cord. So, yeah, redundancy is important, and wherever the project, whatever the platform you're going to be working on, following the guidelines that Marcy was talking about earlier, getting end users involved as much as possible, because there's a gap between technical compliance and real life UX, as we've touched on with various questions before. Getting end users involved after the technical compliance bit has been done will make projects really inclusive for everybody, people with a permanent disability and people who are extreme mobile users on a daily basis. So that's the essence of what I wanted to cover in a sort of a scene-setting way. So now, let's take a kind of a 90-degree left turn. In the UK, the current landscape, and it's probably similar-ish elsewhere, is that websites, for example, 90, often high 90%, depending on which sample of websites you take at random, aren't even single A. And it's been a legal requirement in the UK since, well, arguably 99, but definitely 2003, when an additional code of practice, as it's called, came out to support the Disability Discrimination Act, as it was then, that said that a blind person needs to be able to book airline tickets accessibly. So that was 2003. So in the UK, it's been, 14 years. The Equality Act 2010 superseded the DDA, and that spelled it out very clearly. So there's absolutely no question that in the UK it's a legal requirement, and still, perhaps not for too much longer, there is EU legislation that reinforces, I wish it was forever, but anyway, so EU legislation reinforces the requirement for online, for digital accessibility. And yet, as I say, 90, often, 95, 99 sometimes, % of websites in any random sample aren't even single A. And double A, as I'm sure you're aware, is the legal requirement for most legislation around the world. In Section 508, for example, in the States, is broadly double A as well. And WCAG 2.1, that's going to be coming out soon, it's not going to change much in the sort of general landscape. It's going to be much more fit for purpose in the modern web, but it's still broadly the same. And yet we've got this very, very low level of compliance. Loads of companies are inaccessible, uninclusive, and getting away with it, unless organisations like the RNIB that I mentioned before champion a disabled individual or a group of disabled individuals in a class action to whack that company, basically, to take them to court. And often it's settled out of court, and part of the settlement agreement is anonymity. So we don't have many headlines in the UK around accessibility case law because, they settle. And that's because it's incontrovertible, isn't it? If you run any of the automated tools on a website, it's undeniable that that website has issues that need to be fixed. So even the automated ones that it can absolutely rule on, those images don't have alt tags. They're not decorative images. They're great big, important content, informational images. There's so many things that it can say for sure aren't accessible. And that's, I think, briefly what we're going to talk about after the break, if we decide as collectively that that's something we'd like to talk about. But the enforcement landscape is something I'd like to ask you guys about from the countries where you're coming from. Is, in your experience, if you're aware of it, is the landscape similar from a compliance level point of view that you're aware of?
Yes, I think so. Like you can't do too much in terms of suing. I'm from the Netherlands. We have laws, but I think you can't really enforce too much, and it won't make the headlines either. So yeah, the EU directive is probably the one that we will hope for. Will make things a bit more enforceable.
Cool. Anyone else? I know that legislation is broadly similar across all of the EU nation states, obviously in America as well. And in America there is more noise around the legal side of things, but still, it's a handful every year compared to the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of .com websites or websites in any given country. So what I wanted to talk about very briefly, AbilityNet, and this was one of the links that Yoshi sent round before today. 3 years ago I wrote a letter, like an open letter to the UK government, spelling out the importance of enforcing the law in this area and the simplicity of it and the win-win kind of nature of the activity. So did anyone have a chance to have a quick look at that article? One person, that's great. I'll summarise. So basically, it's no big deal at all. But basically, the scenario is there is 90+% of websites and similar-ish level of mobile apps, although mobile apps are much cleaner, much simpler. In iOS in particular, the toolbox that devs use to make their apps you get accessibility out of the box. Most of the time you have to kind of break accessibility by creating custom controls and that sort of thing and not following the guidelines. So perhaps to a lesser extent on mobile, but there's a vast amount of inaccessibility and non-compliance out there, and yet every single government across Europe and across the developed world is constantly talking about the importance of digital and how the digital economy will drive the greater economy and how people need to be included from a digital point of view. You need to have broadband access to every locality, however rural, in your country. The welfare, the benefit of the nation hinges crucially on digital. And yet we've got this landscape where inclusive design is so important for many, many users, arguably every single user on a daily basis, and yet we've got single digits level of compliance to a law that's been around for so long. And in this open letter to government, we spelt out the fact that it should be the business of government to enforce the law. They do it in, have a police force, they have an army of traffic wardens. I'm sure Germany is the same. If you park 3 milliseconds late on a parking space that you haven't paid, you've only paid for an hour and you come in an hour and 2 minutes, there will be a traffic warden that will descend on you and give you a ticket, or you try and go out the barrier and you have to pay more or whatever it might be. if you're speeding on a motorway, you know, there's umpteen cameras and speed police and all this sort of thing. So there are, and obviously tax law, there are so many areas of law that are highly, highly enforced. It's just the norm, isn't it? And yet we've got an area here which will benefit the economy hugely, that is disadvantaging certain groups disproportionately. You know, it's really limiting their life opportunities. And it's something that takes, on average, 2 to 5% extra budget on any project. So if you build accessibility in from square one, day one, on any project, they reckon 2 to 5% additional overall costs for that project, and that project will be better performing. So, you know, you'll get benefits, you'll recoup your costs further down the line, you will have a slimmer website, it will have, you know, less overheads when it comes to bandwidth costs because you've separated content from presentation, it'll be more platform independent, better SEO, all of these different things. The ROI, return on investment, that you get with accessibility or inclusive design is much, much higher than the 2 to 5% that it would cost. And if there is any kind of legal ramifications, or certainly lost custom if it's an e-commerce site, the lost custom from the poor UX, whether it's for disabled people or for mobile users, far outweighs that 2 to 5%. So there are so many reasons, there are only wins in this scenario, and yet the government chooses not to enforce this area of law. So this letter to government was saying, okay guys, now's the time to start enforcing this, and it should be government, because it's the job of government. It shouldn't be left to special interest groups like, you know, charities like the RNIB, for example, or in the worst case scenario, individual disabled users. So government should be doing it, and it will more than pay for itself. As we saw earlier, it's really very straightforward to ascertain non-compliance. With a command line, like AXCLI, it's one click pretty much, or one line of code, and you get a binary yes or no back again. So for government to put a task force together, to have a department like the department that is monitoring people's tax returns, or the HMRC drives terror into the hearts of everyone who pays taxes in the UK, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. The EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is a similar organisation to do with human rights, doesn't strike terror into anyone's heart, but it should. It should strike terror into the hearts of every organisation that has a website or a mobile app, because it should be as inevitable as getting a parking ticket. If you create a website that isn't accessible, then eventually when that team, and that team can be as big as you like, and they can get through as much auditing as you like, because it's such a quick and incontrovertible process, that it's inevitable that sooner or later your website, you'll get a fine. And if you aren't compliant within a reasonable time, say 8 months or 12 months or something, then it will also be inevitable that you'll get a fine that is 10 times as big, for example. So that was what AbilityNet has been calling for. And we did that 3 years ago, and we've been kind of chipping away at it ever since. But now in the UK, there is a government initiative, a process whereby they are seeking submissions, it's like a public information exercise, and we're around digital inclusion and sort of digital strategy, government digital strategy more broadly, and we're kind of redoubling our efforts in this area, which is why I thought we'd mention about it here. So yeah, it's about accessibility being a given within enforcement. And because it's a government exercise, there won't be any anonymity, because with the RNIB and all these other organisations, I mentioned that part of the settlement, and 99% of the time they settle out of court, part of the settlement is this anonymity. So there's never anything said about it, so it's just not on people's radar. But if it's a government initiative, if it's a government service, then it's subject to an FOI, Freedom of Information. I'm sure you have something similar in your countries. So government activity is always subject to people saying, tell me exactly what you've done, this Freedom of Information request. So AbilityNet and maybe the RNIB and maybe other organisations, we're going to write really well, we're going to make sure that if this ever does come to pass, every month or so, we will say, okay, we'll put in an FOI request and say, which websites have been fined in the last 6 weeks or whatever it might be, and we'll think about publishing those, because every little helps, right? So not only should these fines be going on in the background, and the revenue coming into the government whose services are so stretched, every single day, I'm sure it's the same in your countries, every single day there are stories in the media about the health service being cut, the education service being cut, the police being cut to the bone, all of these different things. This should be such a no-brainer for the government to do that, it's one would hope that it would be something that they would embrace, but to date they have not. So yeah, we would definitely put out an FOI, and so companies that sin in this area would come into the public domain as well. So the carrots and the sticks, well, they're all sticks we're talking about here, aren't we? The carrots are to do with the ROI, and people will come in line, and the landscape hopefully will shift. It'll be like a seismic shift from the snail's pace that we've had over the last decade or so, and hopefully we'll see a huge change over the coming years. So that's what we're aiming to do, and I just wanted to open it out and get people's comments about whether they felt that was something that is appropriate to ask the government to do, is something that could be leveraged in your locality, if you can see any major flaws in the thinking, like this isn't the domain of government to do this. So yeah, any comments at all?
Well, first of all, I think the situation in Germany is, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that only federal institutions need to have accessible websites right at the moment.
EU legislation.
No. Well,
The EU.
no. Please correct me.
So the German law is a bit more complicated. So in Germany it's typically the case that you do have a federal law, and then the federal states have to do an adjusted law for the state itself. So for example, in Germany the BITV, Barrierefreiheit for Informationstechnology, which is just a translation of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is federal law, and then there is, for example, a Bavarian or a Berlin law for accessibility also that applies for their state level institutions. But none of the legislations in Germany precisely go on non-governmental institutions.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say. Municipalities or like hospitals, universities, and stuff like that, they are not obliged to do something at the moment.
They are, but only federal.
Yeah, no, I've got different information about that, because we're just working with the city of Erlangen, and they do it, but they don't have to actually. Yes, which is quite good. And this is the situation; they don't have to. That's the problem right now. So I think
the federal government has
the federal government has to. Yes, that's true. But that's a big difference. I think things are changing. They're about changing right now. And also, I think, is there someone from Austria? No, it's not.
I'm in Austria.
Okay, I think the situation in Austria is quite different, actually.
Yes,
they are far ahead. And, as far as I know, as of 2016, for example, every e-commerce online shop has to be accessible there.
Yes, actually every customer information has to be accessible. Since 2006, there was actually a longer time to get there for buildings and stuff, and they somehow lumped accessibility for online services in there as well, although it was not required. It was required in law much earlier, but yeah. And they have the opportunity to have to sue companies that don't access and stuff like that. So it's really good.
And government websites were included as well?
Yes.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why we've had no response to date, and government have never been willing to see this as part of their remit to enforce, is because their own house hasn't been in order. So you're not going to set up an official department to, nab other people when your own websites were not compliant. So that has historically been, in my guesstimation, the reason why we've not made any traction in this area. That's changed in recent months, and it'd be good to know, well, in recent years, and it'd be good to know if there's what the situation in other people's countries are. But there's been a very significant, a very concerted effort to make sure that government websites are more accessible. So they're certainly not strict AA, absolutely not, but they're not embarrassing either anymore. So they've taken hundreds of websites for different government departments and different services, and they've bunched them all together into DirectGov, and it's much more homogeneous, much more templated, much more accessible across the board. But it's I would be very surprised even if it was single A, but it's not like a complete horror. So I think now there's more chance now of getting this pushed through now in the UK anyway. What's the landscape with regards governmental properties in other countries?
I know in the US, individual agencies spend a lot of money and effort on accessibility. Like, I think some of our tools at DQ are used by thousands of people at all kinds of agencies. But there's sort of individual efforts. I think there is some effort to standardize design with groups like 18F. But as you probably know, our new administration is taking us a little bit backward. So we'll see how that goes as far as accessibility, but it hasn't slipped for the individual agencies. They still care very much and are spending a lot of money to keep things up to date, because we like to sue people in the US. So
yeah, you've got that going for you.
There's a lot of that. Well, we have it going for us and against us.
Yeah. That's actually what Carl said 2 years ago. As long as no one can sue anyone here in Germany or Europe, nothing will happen.
Yeah, well, we have it go a bit too far. I think there's some opportunistic folks who are going after the dollars of suing, but not for the right reasons. And that ends up hurting us in the eyes of a lot of conservative leaders who just think it's frivolous, so then they start stripping away protections because of these bad actors that are suing just to sue. So it's kind of good and bad. But we do have individual mandates for different areas, like the Air Carrier Access Act for airline websites. That's if you're an airline operating in the United States, you are now mandated to have an accessible website, which really moved the needle. I saw it improve sites like Virgin America, and there's even a usability component in that requirement. So we might see that in other vectors in the private area. They're starting to make changes, so sort of a mixed bag of results.
I mean, I think suing is quite an emotive area, and it's not the style of the EU countries to be heavy-handed in that area. That's why I think with the fining model, it's so much more viable a proposition, particularly as governments already have a huge mechanism in place, massive machinery for leveraging fines in terms of the tax machine, the HMRC in the UK. So, getting fines out of companies on a smaller level initially, and then, ramping those up as the non-compliance continues, I think is far more viable if it's done by government, for government, well, for the people. But yeah, so we'll carry on chipping away at that in the UK. And if there's anyone in your countries who are in contact or would like to get in contact with similar organisations, either pressure groups, lobbying organisations, they would normally be in the form of charities like the main disability charities within your country, to just flag with them this idea and send them the URL that Yoshi sent, my open letter that we wrote to our government, to see whether it's something that they would like to start championing in their country as well, and we see if we can get some leverage there, because governments probably universally across Europe would like to see more revenue, and this would be a really good way to do that.
That's such a great idea.
Absolutely. What about other countries? With people from Italy here, what's the situation in Italy?
In Italy, we have a law from 2004 that requires that the website of the administration
Great.
Any other countries in the room?
So I don't know whether Yoshi still wants, well, I'm not sure what form or content we will cover in the final session, but one possible aspect would be to discuss in a very techie way amongst ourselves about whether there are any tools that could help further this agenda. Obviously there are loads of tools out there, DQ being a very notable one, but that could assist in my thinking anyways, like the batch analysis of a large number of websites, and that would come back with a kind of a binary yes or no for compliance. That's relatively straightforward, and I'm sure that they probably already exist, ideally in an open source environment, so that that could be used by anybody, and it wouldn't, that wouldn't be a hurdle, that wouldn't be a barrier to their usage. Just to be able to analyse how broad non-compliance is within different sectors, within different countries, and that's got to be a good thing to help put as many pieces of the jigsaw in place when you're putting your argument to for governments in your locality to enforce the legislation that you might have in your area. So putting the tools on the table, putting the business case on the table for enforcing legislation in this area has got to be a good thing. So if that's something we could briefly discuss about later on, I don't know what other things are on the table, but yeah, that might be a possible item.
This sounded like a kind of conclusion, which is actually not that's actually cool. The schedule will say that in 15 minutes we started session planning for the barcamp part of the event. So actually we could have a short break for 10 minutes or something. I will take that as a first suggestion, as a first proposal for a session, because it's interesting, I think.
Totally optional. I'm sure people have got good ideas.
Well, we're going to collect ideas and see how interested. So let's have a 10 minutes break and then start with the barcamp part. And Robin, thanks a lot. Really great.